For our anniversary, my girlfriend handed me a gym card and smirked. "Time to upgrade you." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, until she added, "Confidence starts with looks." So I took the hint. I hit the gym, got stronger, leaner, sharper. The only thing I didn't lift again was her call. Last Friday was our 2-year anniversary. Emily, 27, and I, 29, went to a midtown bistro I'd reserved weeks in advance. Candlelight flickered across the dark wood table, silverware gleaming, small bouquets of wildflowers tucked into a vase. I'd even gone the extra mile, booked the table with a view of the open kitchen, bought her favorite roses, and pre-ordered dessert with "Happy Anniversary" written in chocolate. Everything felt planned, thoughtful, the kind of evening that should be warm and intimate. Emily arrived 10 minutes late, swiping her phone in the lobby as though I wasn't waiting. She smiled vaguely, no warmth, just the polite corners of her mouth turning up, her eyes darting down to her notifications. I greeted her with a hug, kissed her cheek, and she let out a small sigh, not quite amused, not quite present. "Sorry, work ran late," she murmured, not looking up. I waved it off. I had rehearsed my speech, the things I'd say about how much these 2 years meant, the little surprises I'd lined up. The first 30 minutes passed with careful, surface-level conversation. She spoke in clipped sentences, fingers occasionally tapping her phone, eyes flicking to the screen every few seconds. Our server arrived with the appetizer, a plate of roasted vegetables and seared scallops, perfectly arranged. I tried to share a story about a recent project at work, my hands moving as I spoke, but she interrupted mid-sentence. "Ham," she said, one hand scrolling. No question, no reflection, just a polite acknowledgement of air. I swallowed my frustration, telling myself this was just pre-dinner nerves. When the main courses came, I finally felt the evening settle into a rhythm. Forks clinked against plates, wine swirled in glasses, laughter from nearby tables punctuated quiet conversation. I tried again, mentioning our first trip together, a weekend at the lake last year. Emily smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I glanced at her, tried to read the expression. Was she tired, distracted, or worse, indifferent? Then came dessert. A small plate, warm chocolate cake, powdered sugar dusting the edges. The words "Happy Anniversary" written neatly in chocolate sauce. I leaned back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. This was supposed to be the highlight. Emily reached into her bag and pulled a small envelope, sliding it across the table with a smirk that didn't touch her eyes. "Here," she said, voice flat, casual, almost rehearsed. I lifted the envelope, curiosity teasing the edges of my mind, smiling, assuming it was a card or maybe a note with a thoughtful line. Inside was a gym membership card, sleek and branded, alongside a folded note. "Time to upgrade you." I laughed nervously, thinking this had to be a joke. Emily had a sharp sense of humor, often teasing me about my love of burgers, my worn sneakers, my dad haircut. I looked up, expecting a wink, a playful nudge, a sign she was joking. But her posture was rigid, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on her phone again, scrolling. "Confidence starts with looks," she said, voice steady, almost clinical. Her tone was not playful, not teasing, cold. People at the next table, an older couple celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary of their own, shifted, glanced our way, puzzled by the sudden sharpness in the air. I froze for a moment, trying to process the words, the gesture, the public setting. This wasn't a gift, not in any meaningful sense. It wasn't about health or motivation or even encouragement. It was a carefully wrapped public humiliation, delivered in a setting where everyone could see, where the smile I'd intended to share had been met with judgment, critique, and condescension. I swallowed hard. My tongue felt heavy. My throat tightened, a mix of disbelief and the icy sting of realization. I traced the edge of the card with my fingertip, feeling the embossed logo, the fine print. "Upgrade me," I whispered to myself under my breath, the irony bitter on my tongue. I forced a nod, the polite, measured motion that disguised the heat crawling up my neck. I kept my voice even, but internally, I cataloged everything. The smirk, the words, The way her eyes didn't meet mine. The way she positioned the envelope like a challenge, a statement, a declaration of contempt. I looked around, pretending to admire the candlelight, the decor, the carefully curated plates. Emily's attention never returned to me, absorbed in her phone again. The noise of the restaurant became a blur, the laughter from neighboring tables a distorted soundtrack. I realized I'd spent the better part of 2 years investing care, thought, and attention into a relationship that had quietly turned transactional, performative, and sharply judgmental. The memory of our first anniversary, of spontaneous road trips, and late-night conversations felt distant, almost alien. I reached across the table, picked up my water glass, swirling the liquid slowly, the ice clinking sharply against the glass. My mind ran through options: response, confrontation, explanation. But each scenario dissolved under the clarity that emerged cold and undeniable. This wasn't something to negotiate, charm away, or forgive. It was a statement, a line drawn, and in that line I was no longer willing to remain standing. I placed the envelope back on the table, careful not to knock the card to the floor. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries awareness, not warmth. "Thanks for the gift," I said evenly, voice low, measured. I reached for my coat, slid it on slowly, deliberately. Without waiting for her to respond, I stood, shoulders squared, and left the table. The murmurs from the surrounding diners rose, a subtle echo, but I didn't turn back. The flowers I had bought sat untouched. The chocolate dessert remained, a silent witness to the moment the evening shifted irreversibly. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights shimmering on wet pavement, I felt the strange mixture of relief and grief, clarity and disbelief. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. The gift had ended more than an anniversary. It had ended the illusion of a shared path. I walked away from the restaurant, the echo of her words following me, knowing this was the first of many decisions I'd make alone from this point forward. I wasn't in great shape, maybe 20 pounds heavier than I used to be. Late nights at the office, project deadlines piling up, bad habits creeping in. Takeout, sugar, skipping workouts, and a creeping inertia I didn't notice until now. Emily had never complained openly about my weight, my appearance, or my lifestyle, at least not in a serious confrontational way. The comments were subtle at first, small nudges I could rationalize as jokes. "You'd look better in black," she'd say, fingers flicking through a clothing rack at a store. "Again with the dessert?" she'd murmur at brunch, eyebrows raised, laughing. Always a laugh, never a pause long enough for me to respond. The subtle digs I chalked up to humor, to playful teasing. But her anniversary gift reframed everything in a harsh, glaring light. I remembered scrolling through my phone the night after dinner, her Instagram story popping up again. A photo of us at last month's party, captioned, "Love my teddy bear, for now bareface." All laughing emojis trailing like confetti. The phrasing, the tone, the intent, it hit differently now. The amusement in her friends' comments, the tone of light-hearted ridicule that I had laughed off at the time, now read like a public performance at my expense. My stomach nodded with clarity, cold clarity. It wasn't about humor or casual teasing. It was a message, an expectation, a bar I was supposed to meet. The next morning I woke early. The city was quiet, the streets still slick from the rain overnight, steam rising from vents, the hum of early traffic in the distance. I dressed in old gym clothes, sneakers worn down at the heels, and drove to my gym. It wasn't about proving anything to her. Not really. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I'd let slide. Pride, confidence, autonomy. Those were the stakes, not vanity or revenge. I walked into the gym, the smell of disinfectant sharp in my nostrils, weights clanging faintly in the background. Claire, my trainer, was already there, stretching along the mirror-lined wall, clipboard in hand. I didn't sugarcoat it. "My girlfriend says she's embarrassed to be seen with me," I said, voice flat, though a trace of bitterness edged the words. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile falsely. She just nodded, calm and deliberate, eyes scanning my posture, my frame, my stance. "Then let's make sure you're never embarrassed by yourself again." she said simply, as though the mission were obvious, inevitable, and entirely within my control. Her words hit harder than any insult. I swallowed the lump in my throat, set my bag down, and followed her to the training area. The workout began methodically: compound lifts, free weights, core work, rowing. Claire's voice was precise, guiding, correcting form, pressing just hard enough to challenge, just enough to remind me that progress demanded attention, discipline, sweat. I pushed through the discomfort, the initial burning in my muscles, the groan in my knees, focusing on the cadence of breathing, the sharp control of motion, the tiny victories in each rep. I caught my reflection in the mirror, posture straightening, shoulders tightening, jaw set. Each rep, each pull, each push was a reminder I could shape something tangible, something my effort alone could alter. By mid-session, I felt a strange alchemy. Shame transforming into energy, humiliation into fuel. Emily's words replayed in my mind, not in a loop of self-pity, but as a spark to light action. I had allowed myself to be softened by comfort, dulled by routine, distracted by work, and insulated from self-reflection. Now, each drop of sweat was a reclamation, each set a statement of independence. I wasn't doing this to impress her. I wasn't doing this for applause or acknowledgement. I was doing this to stand tall again for myself, to feel the certainty of control over at least one facet of my life. By the time I left the gym 2 hours later, my body ached in the right ways. Every fiber reminded me that effort mattered, that diligence bore fruit, that personal growth was a currency Emily could neither buy nor dismiss. I drove home, the city waking around me, the streets brightening, the scent of fresh coffee from corner cafes drifting in the crisp air. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of clarity. Humiliation could be turned into momentum, embarrassment into action, and judgment into armor. I resolved silently, methodically. I would become the man who was confident in himself first, independent of approval, immune to ridicule. The rest, including Emily, would follow their course. I arrived at the apartment, soaked in the early light, pulled my hoodie tighter around me, and looked at my reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't perfect, wasn't transformed, but he was awake. He was deliberate. He had begun. And nothing, not sarcasm, not teasing, not social performance, would stop him from reclaiming that control. The first weeks were hell. Every muscle, every tendon, every small joint seemed to ache in protest. The soreness didn't fade fast. It lingered, a reminder that I was doing something tangible, something that mattered. Emily noticed immediately, not in concern, not in support, but in that insidious, cutting way she had. She laughed when I limped up the stairs after a leg day, arms wrapped around the rail for balance. "Need a hand, teddy bear?" she said, her tone flat but the amusement sharp. The words weren't cruel in a loud, obvious way, but the undertone, public, performative, was unmistakable. Her behavior was calculated. She would order takeout, pizza, burgers, indulgent desserts, and sit near me, scrolling through her phone with exaggerated enjoyment, taking small bites, eyes darting toward my reflection in the kitchen mirror. "So when's that six-pack showing up? Christmas?" she'd ask loudly, smirking, as if waiting for me to implode in embarrassment. Her friends joined in sometimes, texting her from the table or posting playful comments, liking the photos she took of our meals together. She used my discomfort as entertainment, the shared amusement of improvement at my expense. At work parties, she didn't stop. I remember one evening at a colleague's rooftop event. I had skipped my usual pre-workout dinner, trying to stay light, mindful, disciplined. Emily arrived in a fitted dress, hair glossy, perfume subtle but noticeable. A coworker approached me, asking about my recent progress. I smiled politely, deflected. Emily, standing nearby, leaned toward her friend and said, "He thinks he's having a midlife crisis. Lifting weights, dieting, poor thing." Her laugh rang across the rooftop, crisp, unyielding. People nearby turned to glance at me, some smirking, some whispering. I lifted my glass, nodded at the comment, and sipped water. It didn't sting anymore. It never had to. At a bar, another night, She cornered me near the jukebox while her coworkers hovered, drinks in hand. "You think you're Rocky, don't you?" she said, voice rising for effect, eyes scanning the group. "Just without the boxing or the abs." But cute attempt. Laughter erupted. That brittle, polite laughter of people caught between social politeness and amusement at someone else's expense. I finished my water, set the glass down, and left the bar. The laughter followed me, but it felt distant, irrelevant, almost like static. Her jokes no longer cut, they propelled. Every barb, every smirk, every public humiliation became a marker, a benchmark, a point to push harder, to measure myself against. 2 months into the regimen, the change was visible. 25 pounds gone, posture straighter, shoulders broader, chest fuller. The mirror reflected a man I hadn't seen in years. Not just physically, but in confidence, in clarity, in composure. Every morning, I traced the contour of my shoulders, the line of my jaw, the tension of my biceps as I reached for the dumbbells, the kettlebell, the resistance bands. I watched myself lift, push, pull, and found satisfaction in the small victories. 5 more pounds, 1 extra set, an additional 10 seconds of planks. Emily's public critiques no longer controlled the narrative. I controlled it. Her contempt became a catalyst. Every comment, every whispered "for now" or exaggerated smirk, became energy I could harness. Instead of internalizing shame, I used it, converted it into sweat, discipline, relentless repetition. At the gym, Claire pushed me harder, but I pushed myself even harder. At home, I didn't shrink when she walked past, didn't glance down, didn't flinch. I stood taller, spoke clearer, moved with precision, awareness, and intentionality. By the end of the 2-month mark, the reflection in the mirror wasn't just the man I had been. It was the man I had decided to become. Disciplined, alert, confident. The man who could no longer be poked, prodded, or belittled into submission. Not by her, not by her friends, not by the subtle, insidious judgments of a dinner table or office party. Emily's laughter no longer resonated with power over me. It resonated as a backdrop, a kind of metronome to my own steady progress. The weight loss was measurable. The mental shift was profound. I no longer felt the tight knot of anticipation before seeing her. I no longer rehearsed defensive retorts in my head. I didn't need to perform for her approval, to negotiate dignity with jokes and sarcasm. I had reclaimed it. Each morning I laced my sneakers, rolled out my yoga mat, or chalked my hands for pull-ups with deliberate purpose. Every choice, every set, every controlled meal was a reaffirmation. I belonged to myself first. And slowly, imperceptibly, Emily's presence, the smirks, the comments, the amusement at my effort, faded from the equation. Her contempt no longer defined the stakes. It merely measured the fuel. By the time I returned from a weekend hike 2 months later, drenched in sweat and sunburned across the shoulders, I realized something chillingly precise. The man who walked into the apartment was no longer the one she had attempted to shape, mock, or diminish. He was someone else entirely, someone she didn't recognize, someone she hadn't accounted for, and that realization, more than the muscles or the weight lost, terrified her in ways she would soon discover. The gym became my second home. Every morning, before the city stirred and before the sun crept past the skyline, I was there. Concrete floors cold beneath my sneakers, iron weights clanging with the rhythm of effort, the scent of sweat and determination thick in the air. Claire guided me through sessions that were as much about mental conditioning as physical strength. She corrected posture, adjusted grip, counted reps with precision, and reminded me to breathe. But the conversations afterward, when we sat on the stretching mats, towels draped over shoulders, sweat cooling on our skin, those were unexpected. She shared stories of working night shifts as a nurse to pay for physical therapy school, of clients who doubted themselves, of small victories that carried more weight than any muscle. I listened, absorbed the discipline, the grit, the real strength, and it reshaped my own perspective. Meanwhile, Emily's presence in the apartment became increasingly tense, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't just her glances at me while I prepared pre-workout meals. or the way she rolled her eyes at the new blender on the counter. It was the way her mood shifted when she saw me reading, lifting, or logging my progress. My early mornings annoyed her. Alarm before 6, shoes in the hallway, the quiet clink of weights as I warmed up before dawn. My meal prep, Tupperware lined up with chicken, quinoa, vegetables, and spices, dominated half the fridge. She would sigh, stare at it for a moment, and comment, "You go to the gym more to flirt than to work out." Her tone was accusing, sharp, but underneath it, I sensed discomfort. My consistency, my energy, my confidence, they were mirrors she hadn't prepared for. That same night, she left for a girls' night with her friends. A casual excuse layered with laughter, wine, and the perfume of freedom. I stayed home, peeling off my sneakers and stretching the soreness from my muscles. I made a choice then, not dramatic, not punitive, but deliberate. I removed her from our shared phone plan, disabling access she'd taken for granted. I changed all the streaming passwords, Netflix, Hulu, the music subscriptions she used daily, the shared cloud storage. Small moves, quiet, almost invisible, but they felt like reclamation, a boundary established in the wake of years of subtle control and belittlement. The effect was immediate, though not violent. When she texted from her phone later, the messages bounced, notifying her of denied access. Her social media posts, previously casual and indifferent, grew tense in phrasing. "We need to talk," she wrote. "Why can't I access my shows? Is this some joke?" I didn't respond immediately. I waited, listening to the quiet hum of the city through the apartment windows, feeling the first taste of what freedom felt like. Not the loud liberation of rebellion, but the steady, quiet satisfaction of setting terms that couldn't be crossed without my consent. Physically, the changes were becoming obvious. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a straighter spine, broader shoulders, leaner arms. The jawline, once soft with sleep-deprived evenings and late-night snacking, now held definition I hadn't expected to see so quickly. My posture spoke of intention, confidence, and accountability. For the first time in years, I didn't shrink when someone looked at me. I didn't bend to subtle judgments or attempt to preempt criticism. My body, my actions, my decisions, they were my own. Mentally, the transformation mirrored the physical. I started planning my day with clarity. Workouts, work tasks, personal projects. I cataloged progress in a notebook, tracking reps, sets, meal plans, and notes about emotional state. Each entry reinforced a sense of control that Emily's criticism had once undermined. I realized how much of my self-worth I had unconsciously tethered to her approval, and now that tethers were gone. The guilt, the tension, the subtle anxiety had dissipated. Evenings became calmer. I'd cook a proper dinner, read a book, sometimes journal the mental shifts taking root. The apartment, once a place of passive unease, now felt structured, intentional. Her attempts to provoke, her sharp glances, her offhand comments, they hit like distant echoes. I could hear them, yes, but they no longer dictated my emotions. Each attempt at influence was met with measured response. Acknowledgement, not engagement. By the end of the month, the contrast was stark. Emily's coldness intensified, her words sharper, her glances longer, but I was insulated. My identity, my confidence, my body, my mind, they were no longer negotiable. The small moves, phone plan, streaming accounts, independent routines were scaffolding, creating boundaries that reinforced a larger transformation. She couldn't push me down anymore. She couldn't steer the narrative in her favor, not now. I felt, for the first time in years, that I was reclaiming life on my own terms, and in that quiet reclamation, the shift from embarrassment to autonomy became absolute. Months had passed since that anniversary dinner, since the gym became my sanctuary, and since I started reclaiming every corner of my life that Emily had quietly judged. I'd built new habits, reshaped my body, and strengthened the mental boundaries that had been fraying under her subtle ridicule. Claire, my trainer, had been integral to this transformation, not just physically but mentally. Her coaching went beyond lifts and cardio. It was accountability, strategy, and honesty. She'd encouraged me to push limits I didn't realize I had, and I had responded, meticulously, deliberately. One morning, She posted photos of my progress on her Instagram. I didn't expect much. Claire had a modest following, mostly local clients, fitness enthusiasts. But the post carried a caption that made me pause. The result of discipline and heart. So proud of my client, and even prouder to call him my boyfriend. My stomach clenched for a fraction of a second. Pride, satisfaction, and a twinge of anticipation all mixed. I trusted Claire and knew the message was authentic, but I also knew Emily's eyes would eventually find it. Within the hour, my phone erupted. Notifications pinged nonstop, messages piling on top of each other from unknown numbers, friends forwarding texts, social media tags, and urgent DMs. Emily's first message was venomous. "You cheated on me with the trainer I paid for? I can't believe this. How could you do this to me?" The all-caps scream of betrayal was immediate and performative. She had framed it to sound scandalous, morally egregious, public, and undeniable, banking on my hesitation to respond emotionally. I didn't respond. I read it, let it sit, and cataloged it for later, screenshots timestamped for context. Then came the fake reviews. Claire's professional page, normally filled with client progress posts, encouragement, and small victories, was suddenly swarmed. One-star ratings from anonymous accounts, snide commentary, claims of unprofessional behavior, and inappropriate client relationships flooded in. Her post, meant to highlight discipline and achievement, was suddenly weaponized. My heart sank slightly, not for me, but for Claire. I knew her integrity, her professionalism, and her genuine guidance. I texted her immediately, "Ignore them. I have screenshots and will contact the platform if needed. It's noise. They can't touch you." Within hours, the gym's moderation team deleted the bogus accounts and reviews. Other clients, loyal and genuine, posted their support. "Claire is incredible. Helped me safely reach goals. Best trainer I've ever had. Zero drama. Your professionalism is unmatched." The noise cleared, the legitimacy prevailed. Emily's attempt at sabotage had failed. But she wasn't done. Far from it. Within the day, she escalated to professional channels. I opened my email to see a message addressed to my boss, subject line sharp and accusing. "Employee using company resources and time to impress women. I demand immediate investigation." My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the absurdity and audacity of the claim. Every detail in the email was framed to insinuate misconduct, exaggerating innocuous actions like gym scheduling, lunch breaks, and casual conversation into evidence of impropriety. I forwarded it to my boss with a single line. "For context, see her narrative." His reply was immediate, laconic, and perfectly calibrated. "Looks like your ex needs therapy. Ignore this. Focus on work." Relief washed over me, a calm clarity replacing any flash of anxiety. Emily had tried to weaponize perception, social influence, and professional standing against me, relying on assumptions that anyone observing the surface would believe her narrative. Yet, her strategy was sloppy. Timelines, screenshots, and context made her claims implausible. The absurdity of accusing someone of using company funds to impress women over a personal transformation post reflected more on her obsession than any reality of misconduct. The day continued in a rhythm of normalcy. Emails, calls, and projects proceeded without interruption, but the chaos of her efforts lingered as background noise, a reminder of the energy she invested in trying to control a narrative I no longer owned. I reviewed screenshots, documenting every message, every comment, every tagged story, proof of her patterns, her escalation, and her refusal to disengage. I realized this was predictable. She had underestimated my response. Calm, measured, and documented. Her attempts at revenge would always fail because they operated on emotion. Mine operated on clarity and evidence. Later, I called Claire. "Everything okay?" I asked. Her voice was steady but tinged with fatigue. I explained what had occurred, screenshots, and context. She laughed softly, ironic and relieved. "I've been warned about exes before, but this is next-level obsession. Don't worry, we've weathered worse." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The room was quiet, the city bustling outside the window. I let the realization settle. The narrative was mine to control. Emily could try to manipulate perception, attack reputation, and incite drama, but she couldn't touch the foundation I had rebuilt. Confidence, focus, and clarity. For the first time in months, I felt free. Not triumphant or vengeful, just free. Every effort she made to destabilize me became evidence of her insecurity, her obsession, and her inability to recognize that control had shifted. I knew one thing. The man who left the anniversary dinner humiliated was no longer the man she could influence, manipulate, or dismiss. And as I stared at the reflection in the glass, the city lights painting faint patterns on the wall, I smiled quietly. Emily's attempts at revenge had failed spectacularly. She had underestimated one immutable truth. I no longer needed her approval. A month after the social media storm and the failed attempts at sabotage, Emily left the city. Not quietly, not without theatrics, but with a level of frustration that felt almost like punctuation on the chapter she had attempted to dominate. The office meltdown was the tipping point. Reports of yelling matches, harsh critiques of junior staff, and accusations that colleagues conspired against her filtered back to me via mutual friends. Stephanie, her closest friend, finally blocked her on every platform, refusing to be dragged into further drama. Even the smallest social networks, the gossip loops she thrived on, had started closing in, leaving her increasingly isolated. For the first time in years, the apartment felt quiet in a way that was restorative rather than oppressive. I noticed the small things. The hum of the refrigerator, the gentle hiss of the kettle on the stovetop, the distant sirens blending into the rhythm of the city. I could read without interruption, eat meals without an audience, and, most importantly, I could breathe without expectation, judgment, or performance. Each moment, mundane and ordinary, felt like reclamation, a quiet assertion of autonomy I had been systematically denying myself for years. One evening, Claire came over for dinner. She had a basket of fresh ingredients: heirloom tomatoes, basil, chicken breasts, and artisanal bread. The apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary as we chopped, stirred, and plated. The rituals of preparing the meal were meditative, almost therapeutic. When she wrapped her arms around me from behind, pressing her cheek against my shoulder, she whispered softly, "I'm proud of you." I froze for a moment, savoring the weight of her words. I knew she wasn't referring to the external transformation, my leaner frame, my shoulders sharper, my posture commanding. She was recognizing something far deeper, the man I had become. The one who had stopped carrying the weight of Emily's ridicule, the subtle, cumulative contempt, the constant measurement of approval. I felt the layers of tension I'd carried for years dissolve in the warmth of that embrace. It was more than pride. It was acknowledgement of discipline, resilience, and the reclamation of self. I thought back to the anniversary dinner, to the envelope she handed me, the gym card, the smirk, the words, "Time to upgrade you. Confidence starts with looks." At the time, it had been a public humiliation, a deliberate incision into my dignity. But now, in the quiet of my kitchen, slicing tomatoes and listening to the soft pop of the bread, the irony struck me with clarity. She had been right, but not in the way she imagined. I had upgraded, not to appease her or to meet some invisible standard, not to chase approval or status. I had upgraded for myself. Stronger, calmer, deliberate, happier. The journey had left its marks. The visible, physical evidence of sweat, soreness, and effort. The invisible, internal evidence of self-possession, patience, and emotional regulation. I had built boundaries, learned the discipline to protect my time and energy, and cultivated relationships that respected who I had become. Claire's presence, her support, her unwavering focus on growth without judgment, had been pivotal. Her pride in me was validation of autonomy, not conquest or competition. For the first time, I realized the power of detachment. The energy I had once expended worrying about her approval, decoding her moods, and mitigating humiliation was now available for growth, creativity, and genuine connection. I could invest without fear, speak without overthinking, act without anticipating sabotage. The apartment, my schedule, my routines, they all bore the imprint of choice, not concession. The gym card she had given me, her thinly veiled insult, her attempt at control, sat in the drawer. I never touched it again. It was a symbol of intent, a catalyst, a challenge. I had met that challenge and surpassed it in ways she could never manipulate or diminish. I had grown not just in physique, but in mind and spirit. Strength, clarity, and autonomy were now my currency. As I plated the meal and poured 2 glasses of wine, I felt the final layer of tension lift. Emily's voice, her laughter, her smirks, her judgments, they no longer occupied space in my mind. The only thing I never lifted again was her call, her opinion, her interference. I had upgraded, and the upgrade was permanent. Peace settled in like a quiet tide, and for the first time in years, I felt wholly, undeniably, unshakably myself.